I know, Lois. I'm very sorry. I have another pair in my office.
Well, I better get them for you. I'll meet you at the studio.
Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a mystery that has haunted Hollywood for over 60 years. It's a story about a man who became a legend, and then, in a single night, a ghost. I'm talking about George Reeves, the very first Superman to fly across our TV screens. His death in 1959 was ruled a suicide, but for decades, people have looked at the facts and felt that something was terribly wrong, that the official story just didn't make any sense. Was it really a simple, sad ending for a struggling actor, or was there something much darker and more sinister at play? Get ready, because we're going to dive deep into the secrets, the strange coincidences, and the new details that have finally started to solve this mystery. And I promise you, the truth is way worse than you can even imagine. In 1959, George Reeves was a big deal. For millions of kids across America, he wasn't just an actor. He was Superman. He was the Man of Steel, a symbol of hope and strength. But in his own life, things weren't so great. The show had stopped filming, and for 2 years, he hadn't had a job as an actor. He was worried about money and felt like Hollywood had forgotten him. Then, on the night of June 16th, everything came to a shocking end. He was at his home in Benedict Canyon with his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, and a few friends. The house was filled with noise and laughter, but George was in a bad mood. He went upstairs to his bedroom, clearly upset. Sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone downstairs heard a single loud bang. One of the guests, a man named William Bliss, went upstairs to check on him and found George dead in his bed. When the police arrived, they found a very confusing scene. The guests were all a little drunk, and their stories kept changing. They all agreed on one thing, though. George had been very sad about his career and had shot himself. Leonore Lemon, his fiancée, was the first to tell the story. She said George was unhappy about being known only as Superman and that his career was over. So, the police quickly wrote it all down as a suicide because of his sadness. But right away, people started to notice things that just didn't add up. For one, the gun found near his body had no fingerprints on it, and there was no gunpowder residue on George's hands. How could a person shoot themselves and not have any fingerprints on the gun or any evidence of gunpowder on their hands? It was a really strange detail that no one could explain. The mystery only got weirder from there. The police found 3 bullet holes in the bedroom, but the witnesses downstairs swore they only heard one shot. How do you explain the other 2 bullets? The police also said there was no sign of a struggle, but some people later said there were bruises on his body. And the investigation itself seemed to be a mess. The police didn't even protect the crime scene, and a lot of important clues, like fingerprints, were just ignored. The guests were all so confused and drunk that their stories were full of holes. Even George's fiancée, Leonore Lemon, said something really strange before the shot. She told a friend he's going to go shoot himself now, almost as if she knew what was going to happen. It was all so bizarre and didn't fit the simple story the police were telling. Because of all these weird details, many people in Hollywood and beyond didn't believe the official story. They thought the police had rushed to a conclusion to close the case quickly. They started to wonder if something much more sinister had happened. The fingers of suspicion began to point at 2 people, Leonore Lemon, his fiancée, and a very powerful and dangerous woman named Toni Mannix. Toni was the wife of Eddie Mannix, a big shot at MGM Studios who was rumored to have connections to the mob. George had a long affair with Toni that lasted many years, and a lot of people wondered if maybe the real reason for his death was jealousy, either from Leonore or from a powerful man who wanted revenge. The story gets even more twisted. The guests at the party that night waited almost 45 minutes after they heard the gunshot before they called the police. Can you imagine? For almost an hour, no one called for help. What were they doing during all that time? Were they just sitting there in shock, or were they trying to get their story straight? No one knows for sure. Then there was a super creepy phone call. Someone called a friend of George's and told them to turn on the radio because George had just killed himself. But the strange part was that the call happened before the news had even come out. How could a person know what happened before the police even told anyone? It was a clue that made the whole case even more confusing. George's mother, Helen Besselo, never believed the suicide story for 1 second. She was a mother who knew her son better than anyone, and she said it wasn't like him to give up like that. She hired a famous lawyer named Jerry Giesler to help her find the truth. But even he couldn't find enough new evidence to change the official ruling, and he later quit the case without giving a reason, which made people even more suspicious. The case went cold, and the story of George Reeves's death became a sad Hollywood legend. The clean gun, the extra bullets, the long delay in calling the police. All these questions just hung in the air for decades, never getting answered. The man who taught a whole generation of kids that a man could fly was buried in a cemetery in California, and in a final sad moment, he was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame a year later. It was a tribute to a hero whose final chapter was one of Hollywood's biggest and most tragic mysteries. Even after the official ruling, the whispers and doubts never stopped. The police said George was a man who gave up hope, but his friends and coworkers didn't believe it. Men like Gig Young and Alan Ladd, who knew how tough Hollywood could be, just shook their heads. They couldn't believe that the man who played such a strong and hopeful character would just give up. Another actor, Rory Calhoun, said something that a lot of people in Hollywood agreed with. No one in Hollywood believed the suicide story. The biggest reason for their disbelief was something a lot of people don't know about. Superman was about to fly again. After a long break, the TV show was going to come back for another season, and George was going to wear the cape and tights again. The show was going to be a huge hit all over again, and he had a big, new contract waiting for him. Why would a man who was about to get his career back on track, a man who was about to become famous all over again, suddenly choose to end it all? The timing was just all wrong. Then, a bombshell dropped, one that made everyone believe something dark had happened. It came from Phyllis Coates, the first actress to play Lois Lane alongside George Reeves. Years later, she said she got a phone call from Toni Mannix, George's former lover and the wife of the powerful MGM executive Eddie Mannix. And what was so terrifying about the call? It came before the news of George's death had even been made public. In a strange and scary voice, Toni Mannix didn't say that George was gone. She said that he had been murdered. This was a massive revelation that seemed to break the official story into a million pieces. The darkest theory of all started to make sense, that the powerful Eddie Mannix, who was known to have connections to some very bad people, had George killed out of jealousy and revenge for his wife's broken heart. At the same time, everyone looked back at Leonore Lemon, his fiancée. Her stories to the police kept changing, and she had a lot of public fights with George in the days leading up to his death. Her strange delay in calling for help and her eerie comments about George going to end it made her look very, very suspicious. It was a giant web of powerful people, secret love affairs, and reasons to be angry, and it made people believe that the truth of George's death was way more complicated than a simple suicide. The single gunshot in that house in 1959 sent a shockwave through Hollywood that is still felt today, leaving a permanent question mark over the death of the Man of Steel. But to really understand the darkness of that night, you have to understand who George Reeves was before he became Superman. He started out with so much promise, with a small role in the movie Gone with the Wind. But after that, his career kind of went nowhere. He was stuck doing small parts in B-list movies, and after he came back from serving in World War II, Hollywood had moved on. He was a great actor, but he was struggling to find work. He even had to get a second job digging cesspools to make ends meet, which shows you just how bad things had gotten for him. He was a man who was trying his best, but the dream he had was turning into a nightmare. Then, in 1951, he was offered the role of a lifetime. A new medium called television was starting, and they wanted him to play a superhero named Superman. George didn't want the part. Back then, TV was seen as a step down from the big movies, and he was afraid that if he played Superman, he would never be taken seriously as an actor again. But he was broke and desperate for money, so he took the job, hoping it would only be for a little while. Little did he know, he wasn't just taking a job. He was becoming a character he would never be able to escape. The show was a huge hit, and he became a hero to millions of kids. But for George, it was also a curse. He became trapped in the role. Producers couldn't see him as anything but Superman, and he couldn't get any other jobs. He was famous, but he was also struggling financially and felt like he was a prisoner in his own life. This was the man behind the costume, a man not made of steel, but of flesh and blood, who felt like his dream had become his worst enemy. So, The official story was that a man who was broken by his career killed himself. But George's business manager and his mother never believed it. They said he was a fighter, not a quitter. His mother said, "It's not like my George to do a thing like that." They said he was starting to make his own way in Hollywood, directing some of the Superman episodes and talking with a lot of excitement about producing and writing his own stories. These weren't the actions of a man who had given up. He was fighting back. But his personal life was a total mess, and it was getting very dangerous. In 1958, he ended his long, secret love affair with Toni Mannix, the wife of the powerful MGM executive, and got engaged to Leonore Lemon. This was a huge mistake. Breaking Toni's heart was one thing, but embarrassing her and her very powerful husband in public was something else entirely. Eddie Mannix was known to be a man you didn't want to mess with, and he was furious. This simple act of leaving one woman for another fueled the darkest theory of all, that George didn't end his life, but that it was ended for him by the hand of a very powerful man seeking revenge. But even his new life with Leonore wasn't a fairy tale. They fought a lot, especially when they were drinking, and she was really disappointed that he wasn't as rich as she thought he was. Then came the final, shocking twist. After he died, when his will was read, it was discovered that he had left everything not to his fiancée, but to the woman he had just left, Toni Mannix. This made everyone wonder. Was it a secret way of telling Toni he still loved her? Or did he just not have enough time to change his will after he got engaged? We'll never know. All we have are the strange pieces of the puzzle, the mysterious bruises, the 3 bullet holes, and the eerie comments from his fiancée. This wasn't a simple story of a sad man. This was a dark, complicated story with powerful people, love, and revenge all mixed together. The death of George Reeves, the first Superman, wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the beginning of what people started to call the Superman curse, a long line of bad things that happened to the actors who played him. People started to believe that the role itself was somehow cursed. The mystery of George Reeves's death has never been officially solved, but over the years, all the little facts and details have come together to form 3 main theories. The first is the official story. He was a sad man who killed himself. But this is the one that's the hardest to believe because of all the weird facts. The second is that he was murdered by powerful people, maybe by Eddie Mannix, who wanted revenge. The third is that it was a terrible accident, a chaotic night of drinking and fighting that ended in a horrible mistake, and the people at the party tried to cover it up to save themselves. No matter which theory you believe, the story of George Reeves is a sad one. He was a man who became a hero to millions of people, but in his own life, he was a man struggling to find his way, a man who was trapped in a role he couldn't escape. His death is one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, a sad reminder that sometimes the most heroic stories have the darkest endings. What do you think happened that night? Suicide, murder, or a tragic accident? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this video gave you chills, please give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's darkest secrets.